Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about Dungeons& Dragons canon. Now, at this point, I have defined every single level of Dungeons& Dragons canon as it exists within my humble opinion. So, there is Dungeons& Dragons, and here, so Dungeons& Dragons, what are the levels of canon that another intellectual property can have to Dungeons& Dragons? Core canon, pure canon, strong canon, general canon, weak canon, non canon, and anti canon. Okay. So I believe that is 7 layers of canon that an intellectual property can have to Dungeons and Dragons. Now, the reason we need to define that is Dungeons and Dragons exists on a level of complexity that no other intellectual property in the world exists. Nothing else has as many connections to other intellectual properties as Dungeons and Dragons. Because Dungeons and Dragons has pursued intellectual property crossovers in ways that are not even understood in the industry. I'm convinced that many of the companies that have connected themselves by canon to Dungeons and Dragons are often not even aware of it, right? Because the type of intellectual property it's doing, there aren't even names to, like, literally I'm the first person to define different levels of Dungeons and Dragons canon. No one's ever even done it before. We don't even have the language to have this discussion yet. We're building the language now, right? But today what I want to talk about is threading. Okay, so not only does your intellectual property have a canon level, every intellectual property in the world has a different level of canon to Dungeons and Dragons, right? So those levels are level 1, core, level 2, pure, level 3, strong, level 4, general, level 5 is weak, level N is non, and level A is anti. Okay, so every single one has a level. It can be defined by the word, or it can be defined by a number or a letter. Congruous, set. Okay, let's talk about threading. All right, so threading is, and again, this has never happened on any other product in the world. It's truly unprecedented. So let's talk about threading. So threading is a way that an intellectual property binds itself even tighter to Dungeons and Dragons, right? So let's talk about threading. All right. So first of all, I'm going to explain what threading is, but what I want you to understand is that threading can take an intellectual property from one level to a higher level. Okay. So perhaps the product is like strong canon, but it could end up being pure canon because it's threaded in different ways. All right. So let me give you an example of threading. Okay. And then you'll hear the definition. So Star Wars is massively threaded to Dungeons and Dragons. So how would that be? How is Star Wars threaded to Dungeons and Dragons? So the first way is Fortnite. Okay, so Fortnite is canon to Dungeons and Dragons through Magic the Gathering. Okay, so they created a Fortnite Magic the Gathering card set, a secret lair drop. And there's a card called the cube, and that cube is like, the cube says, hey, this is used to transport people back and forth across a planar bridge between the Magic the Gathering realms, which are canon to Dungeons & Dragons and fully accessible to the Dungeons & Dragons realms. And and so Fortnite is canon to Dungeons & Dragons through the Magic the Gathering bridge. Okay. Fortnite contains many Star Wars characters, right? Star Wars items, Star Wars locations. It talks about, it's actually created Star Wars events, right? Like it's huge, right? So that's one way. Another one is Funko Pop. So you will find, Funko Pop figures for both Dungeons and Dragons, and you will find them for Star Wars. Dice. There are official Yahtzee Dungeons & Dragons dice. There are official Star Wars dice. Okay. And the list just goes on and on and on in ways that Dungeons and Dragons is threat that in ways that Star Wars has threaded itself through different methods to Dungeons and Dragons canon, right? And Star Wars threading to Dungeons and Dragons is particularly high. It's one of the intellectual properties that is threaded to Dungeons and Dragons from multiple methods. I haven't found it yet, but I'll bet you $1,000,000 to 1 there's also a Hollywood thread, right? That someone who was in a Dungeons and Dragons movie was also in a Star Wars film. I haven't found it yet, but I'm very confident it's there, right? But you don't even need that. It's already thread through 3 different channels, right? And actually, it's thread through far more channels than that, right? That's just the 3 examples I'm giving you. Threading is very important, and I intend to talk about threading in detail and just define all the ways that intellectual properties thread themselves to Dungeons and Dragons. And I just wanted to say thank you for letting me discuss this fascinating topic with you. D&D canon is one of the most interesting subjects in the world to me, and I'm really excited to define it and build a language to actually discuss Dungeons and Dragons canon in a mature and complex way. Because at this point, I don't even think it's remotely understood by most people. And I'm also even convinced it's not really understood by many of the executives that actually establish canon within Dungeons and Dragons. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.